I'd like to welcome everyone to PHN Presents. I'm Ken Levinson, the Executive Director of the Passive House Network. And we are glad to have Amanda Clevenger and Ian Simonides of Bright Power with us today to talk about the IRA and its implications for passive house funding, for energy efficiency, and everything that goes with that in general, but with an eye to passive house and how we might fit in with that funding. Before we get started, in case you're not familiar with the Passive House Network, I'd like to note that we're a national nonprofit organization with 7 regional chapters, and we have members from coast to coast. We're affiliated with the Passive House Institute, the International Passive House Association, and we work closely with over 30 building certifiers who comprise the North American Passive House Certifier Circle. We like to say that people who want green building often don't have clearly defined or realistic targets for what sustainable building really could be or should be. And so we're really focused on providing education and community to professionals and consumers alike across the building industry so that they can make the best design and construction decisions every time. We're about showing that if we work together, we can build a better world. We connect global knowledge with regional contexts and local applications, and we hope you join us in this effort. I want to make a quick note on upcoming deadlines on some of our other programming that we have. This Friday, we're kicking off 2 certified passive house designer courses. They are hybrid courses, online, live online, on demand online, and in-person components. It is the core sort of competency of being a passive house professional. And one is starting with the regionally organized for the Northeast and the other for the Rocky Mountains. So if you're in either area and you've been thinking about becoming a passive house professional, getting certification, this is the time. Go for it. There are still a few spots left in each cohort. This Sunday is the deadline for the early bird special for the International Passive House Conference happening in Wiesbaden, Germany, which is just outside of Frankfurt, in March. But if you have any inkling at all, get your tickets early and get the best deal possible. If you haven't been to the international conference, it is a not to be missed event at some point. Every time I've gone that I was able to go, you just meet new people from around the world, exposed to new projects, and you just come away really well networked and fortified with great knowledge. And then finally, for our conference, which is happening this fall in September, October in Denver, Colorado, we have the deadline for the call for papers this January 31st. So if you're working on anything, have any great ideas, share your ambitions for a better world with us. We only ask that Passive House be the platform for realizing those ambitions. I'd like to thank our sponsors who we couldn't do much of our programming without. And we're very fortunate that we're supported by industry players who care about high quality products and services and collaboration within the passive house market. And if your company values high quality, high performance passive house buildings, we'd love to talk to you as well. As you can see here, we have companies from insulation, enclosure, ventilation, HVAC, windows and doors, and service providers. It takes a whole ecosystem, and we hope you'll join us there. So with that, I'm glad to get our presentation going. Please put your questions in the chat, and when the presentation is done, we'll put them into our conversation that we'll have to discover more and dig into the topics of the presentation. We will be making this recording available, and I believe we'll also be able to supply a PDF of the slides, so you don't need to worry about madly taking too many notes. There's a fair amount of information that's about to come at you. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Amanda Clevenger. who's the policy and programs manager at Bright Power and leads the company's compliance consulting on laws like Local Law 97, incentive program strategy, and numerous policy efforts to address the many barriers facing decarbonization of buildings. She is continuously working to maximize funding opportunities for every project, including solar, energy efficiency, high performance certifications, electrification, and more. Amanda also advocates on behalf of her clients' interests to regulators and legislators on the local and state level. Ian Simonides is the policy and programs analyst at Bright Power. And he has a master's of international development focused on energy and the environment from the University of Pittsburgh. Ian conducts research and analysis on building compliance laws, such as benchmarking requirements and building performance standards. He also tracks, analyzes, and communicates the ever-changing details of utility, state, and federal incentive programs. He also assists in Bright Power's advocacy efforts to utilities, regulators, and local and state regulators. So with that, it's my great pleasure to hand over. I will stop sharing and hand it over to, I believe, Amanda will be going.
Yeah, that's me. So thank you so much, Ken, and to everybody else at the Passive House Network for inviting us to speak today and for putting on this great event. This is a really, really important topic, as I hope you all have heard about already. And if not, by the end of this webinar, hopefully you will feel that way too. And we'll kick it off. Can you go to the next slide, Ian? Great. So like Ken said, Ian and I are from Bright Power's policy and programs team. And so for those of you who haven't heard very much about Bright Power to date, I'll start with a little brief overview of who we are and what we do. So Bright Power offers energy and water management solutions for multifamily and commercial properties mostly. We're based in New York City. Services include energy benchmarking, auditing, retrofit consulting, solar, and most important for today's conversation, we offer high performance building certifications like Passive House, Energy Star, Enterprise Green Communities, LEED, you name it, we probably do it. We are one of the leading providers of consulting services for affordable multifamily, going after low-income housing tax credit awards, helping them understand the design and sustainability guidelines, the certification options, and the strategies that we can use to drive maximal energy performance in those buildings. So it's really a multifaceted and holistic approach that we're trying to offer to achieve those goals, whether it's for a ground up new construction project, a gut rehab, a retrofit of an existing building, we can help with it all. And so one of the things that Bright Power does to help facilitate the projects that we do is to bring in incentives. And so I apologize, Ken, for making you read those very long bios. But the gist is that we, Ian and I, are very different from a lot of other service providers in that we have extensive incentive program research capabilities in-house. And so we help all of our projects, whether it's solar or a Passive House project, for example, leverage cash rebates, tax credits, financing programs, and more. And so over the past several years, the policy and program staff at Bright Power has helped to pull in tens of millions of dollars in incentives for our projects. So it's a really important function. And there honestly has never been a more important time to have this expertise. For those of you who are based in New York or California or other states where there are already very lucrative incentive programs available, understanding the landscape was already a complicated task. And now with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act that we're going to talk about today, there's even more opportunities to access cash and tax advantages for your projects. So there's a lot of new money coming. At first glance, it's pretty challenging to understand how all of those things are going to fit together. So that's what we're going to talk about today, so that hopefully as the development of these new subsidies from the IRA and the rules come out, that you will know which programs you want to keep an eye on. Next slide. Okay, so moving on to our agenda. we're going to do several things today. We'll talk through a basic overview of what the law is, where it came from, its impact on a broader level. We'll talk through the key pieces that are probably going to be most lucrative for your projects. And then we'll talk through how to incorporate IRA subsidies into your planning processes. And at the end, we will have plenty of time for your questions. So like Ken said, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. We will have plenty of time for a Q&A at the end of the session. Next slide. Okay, so we'll start with some background about what the legislation is. So most of the compliance requirements or incentives for buildings currently come from either state or local governments. In New York, incentives come from utilities or a third-party agency called NYSERDA. In other states, there are similar third parties that are running incentive programs, and the planning for a lot of those programs is overseen by a state regulator. And so the IRA is really exciting because this is really the first substantive federal action that we've seen on climate ever. And so over the summer, Congress passed this legislation, which is now the single largest climate investment in our nation's history at the federal level. It started last year under the Build Back Better negotiations. It died a few times in Congress, and then Senator Schumer and Senator Manchin surprised everyone early in the summer of last year with a deal that was ready to go. And so now that the bill has been signed, there's over $369 billion available for numerous initiatives that are fighting climate change. For today's sake, we're going to focus on what's in the IRA for buildings. But the IRA has a whole lot more than just building specific programs. There's subsidies for utility scale wind and solar, transmission, electrified transportation, conservation efforts. So the list goes on and on and on. One of the things that I do like to point out, though, is that the IRA is heavier on the carrots rather than the sticks, meaning that most of the legislation, especially for buildings, is comprised of incentives rather than regulations. And the reason for that is because we already have dozens of local jurisdictions from Boston to DC, New York City, St. Louis, Washington State, that have their own regulations for buildings that require things like energy audits or tune-ups, or in some cases, a building performance standard that's more extensive. And so the IRA really complements a lot of those types of laws with these new incentives so that buildings in those jurisdictions, and there's already a lot, there's going to be more, those buildings will now have significantly better financial support to meet those requirements, which I think is really cool. Next slide. So next, I want to give everyone a sense of the impact that the IRA will have nationwide. So this graph from Rhodium Group is showing the comparison between nationwide emissions reductions with and without the IRA. So in blue, this is the forecast for without the legislation. And then in orange, this is the significantly reduced forecast with the legislation. And so we can see a significant reduction in the emissions forecasted for 2030, which is exciting. And we could see a 44% decrease in emissions across the country now that the IRA has been passed into law. Next slide. So continuing with the theme of just how completely unprecedented this really is, take a look at some of these anticipated funding levels for some of the subsidies included in the IRA. So most of these programs will use a few $1 billion each. We'll walk through these in more detail later on. But to give you a sense of the scale of what we're talking about, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund here at the bottom of the table is a new EPA program that was included in the legislation. It's getting $27 billion thereabout. And this one program by itself has more than 3 times what the entire EPA, the whole agency, used to get in 1 year. So that's a lot of money. And I say that because I think for some of the folks that were advocating and have been advocating for IRA type legislation at the federal level for a long time, that they were disappointed that the resultant IRA didn't go further than it did. Which is what Congress was initially planning during the Build Back Better negotiations last year. And even though they cut it down, we still have to recognize that this is a very unprecedented amount of money that we're talking about that is really going to change the entire landscape of our industry easily. Next slide. So now we'll talk through some of the key subsidies one by one. You will probably notice as we go that there is not actually a passive house specific subsidy in the IRA. Before you rage quit or like, why did you waste 15 minutes of my life? There are several pieces within the IRA that even though they're not designed only for passive house, can still be extremely useful for passive house projects. So that's what we're going to talk through today. Maybe in the future, if you all want to give some more money to the Passive House Network, we can get some better lobbyists and get Passive House specifically into the IRA of the future. But for the moment, we're gonna make the best of what we've got already. The second point I want to make before we get started is all of the details that we're going to talk through today are still subject to change. We are not lawyers. This is not official legal advice. You can't sue us. Sorry. Nothing is set in stone yet. We'll talk about this in more detail towards the end. But the gist of what's happening is that the federal agencies are undergoing rulemaking processes that could alter some of what you see here today. But we're keeping a close eye on the developments so that we can put out some more updates once we get more detailed information about all of the different programs that we're going to talk about. And then one last note I want to make. Bright Power, we are the experts on multifamily and commercial. I know there may be some of you who are in the single family space as well. We have noted in some spots where single family can qualify for some of the money that we're going to talk about. If you have questions specific to single family projects, we'll do our best to answer them today. I also suggest checking out some of the resources that the White House and RMI and some other organizations have put out specifically for single family projects if you have questions that we can't answer. All right, our disclaimers are done. Let's get going. Okay, so we're going to start with solar PV, energy storage, and EV charging. Next slide. All right, so we're going to start with multifamily rentals and commercial buildings. We'll get to condo, co-op, and single family solar on a different slide. I know most, if not all of you who are looking at passive house are going to need on-site solar, so the investment tax credit can help you get there. The ITC has been around for a long time. I think it's been well over 10 years since it was first passed. But under the IRA, the ITC is getting a really, really big boost. The base credit is going up from 26 to 30%. There are several new bonuses that we're going to discuss in a second that I think are really exciting. There are other new features that are enacted via the IRA legislation. So you can now include interconnection costs as part of your ITC filing. There's also a direct pay feature, meaning that qualifying nonprofits can receive a cash payment that would help them avoid going through a syndicator to monetize the credit, which would be really cool. That's another one where we really need to see how the rules from the federal agencies shake out. And then also, if you want to install a storage system, you can now claim the tax credit even if the storage is not paired with solar, which is cool. And one piece to note at the bottom, if you're doing projects that are over 1 megawatt, you have to meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements for your project in order to claim these credits. Next slide. So there are several new bonuses for the ITC. Again, this is only multifamily rentals and commercial buildings, condos, co-ops, and single family we'll get to in a second. So there's 5 bonuses here. And these are the bonuses that you get on top of the base 30% ITC credit. So the first is the domestic content bonus. You can get a 10% bonus if you can show that the equipment was produced domestically. We have a short summary here of the 2 pieces of the requirement, like ensuring that all the steel and iron were produced domestically and that a percentage of all the goods were produced domestically. One thing to note here is that there are a few circumstances where the domestic content piece is a requirement and not an optional bonus. For example, starting in 2024, if you want to access that direct pay feature and get the full ITC value, you have to meet the domestic content requirements. So not something you have to worry about in the immediate future, but it's something to keep in mind for a few years down the road. So the next bonus is the energy communities bonus. This is a 10% bonus only for properties that are located on a specific map. And so the map includes communities that have been affected by fossil fuel job loss. So if you are in like a coal community, for example, this might apply to you. Even if you're not sure if your community would count here, we still suggest keeping an eye on this, because if you do happen to be located within one of these regions, this is probably going to be one of the easier bonuses to file for in terms of the paperwork. We anticipate it's probably going to be you're either located in the right region or you're not. So it's easy to check. Now, getting into the low income bonuses here, these are really exciting. The first is a 10% adder under the low income communities category. This one is actually very similar to the energy communities category in that the eligibility criteria we think they're going to use is just going to be a map. So basically, if you're located within a designated low income community on the map, you're eligible for the 10% bonus and should be regardless of the income level in your building. Which could mean that if you have a market rate multifamily rental, for example, or commercial properties located in those regions, that you might be able to access that too, which would be cool. And then the last two low income adders are both at 20%. These are the two that we know the least about at this point. We'll need guidance in the forthcoming rules. These will only be for qualifying affordable housing, and there is a tenant benefit requirement for each that we don't know fully what that will entail. So the Treasury Department is supposed to put out more rules on the low income bonuses next month. So hopefully we'll have some answers pretty soon. And one important point about all of the low income bonuses is that unlike the other tax credits, which are handled by the IRS, these low income bonuses are going to require a special application to the Treasury Department to participate. You will not be able to just claim it when you file with IRS. So there's going to be a special set of forms, a little bit of extra work. But when you think about potentially getting like a 50, like a 70% ITC credit, it's still worth it. All right, next slide. So now we're going to get into solar tax credits for condos, co-ops, and single family projects. They're going to fall under this 25D credit. This is very similar to the way that this credit worked before the IRA. This is a 30% credit. If you have a condo or a co-op property, Rocky Mountain Institute is speculating that those properties will be able to claim the credit individually, as opposed to only being able to claim a proportional share of the total. But we'll have to see how the rulemaking process plays out. All right, and next slide. And then EV charging tax credits are also getting a boost, but only for properties that are located within a qualifying low-income community or a non-urban census tract, meaning that you have to be in either like a rural area or in a low-income community to access this credit. The base rate is 6%, and that goes up to 30% for projects that meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. There are additional credits available for vehicle purchases that you may have seen some news about, but for the sake of time today, we've got a lot to go. We're going to stick to the subsidies that apply only to buildings. And now I will pass it over to my colleague, Ian Simonides, to talk through subsidies for energy efficiency and electrification projects.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Ken, for having us. I'm going to talk through some of the tax credits and rebates for building energy efficiency and electrification. So starting off here with this residential energy efficiency tax credit, this is available for single family homes, co-ops, and condominiums, not available for commercial or multifamily. It's a 30% tax credit that is available starting at the beginning of this year, with a maximum of $3,200 annually. So that was a shift from the way this was before the IRA. It was a lifetime cap, and they shifted it to an annual cap. So you can see here the dollar amount credit caps for each type of equipment: heat pumps, windows and skylights, exterior doors, building envelope upgrades, electric infrastructure, central air conditioning, boilers, domestic hot water, and also a great little piece there at the end is $150 for an energy audit, which is the best place to start when you're looking to install this type of equipment in your home. So that is the residential energy efficiency tax credit. And then next up, we have the energy efficient home tax credit. And this applies to multifamily, single family, and condos and co-ops, but not commercial. Commercial we'll get to in the next slide. This is available for both new construction and existing building retrofits. And you have sort of two types of certifications that are required. And I want to note here, the two certifications are Energy Star certification and Zero Energy Ready Home. Both of these certifications are easy to get when you're already doing passive house certification. So that's great. This new version of the credit in the IRA includes high-rise multifamily properties, which in the previous iteration, there was a limit on the number of stories. So that's another great piece of this new version. And then lastly, taxpayers claiming LIHTC would not have to, and LIHTC, excuse me, for those I don't know, it's a low income housing tax credit. You would not have to reduce the basis for credits claimed under this when using this tax credit. And here you can see the tax credit rates for single family and multifamily. And then for multifamily, if you are following the prevailing wage requirements, you're getting an increase of up to $2,500 per dwelling unit for Energy Star and $5,000 per dwelling unit for Zero Energy Ready Home. The prevailing wage requirements, we still are awaiting on some of the rules on those. So those are forthcoming as well. And now moving on to the commercial side. So this is for commercial and also some multifamily rentals as well, if it's a mixed use. This is for new construction and existing building retrofits. Under the 179D, nonprofit building owners can transfer the credit to the primary design professionals responsible for the project, which is a great new feature. And the projects must reduce their site EUI by at least 25% under baseline, which with passive house certification should be pretty easy to do, which is great. And then the two baselines, the new construction baseline is ASHRAE 90.1 2016. And then this new version of 179D for existing building retrofits, you're actually going to use existing conditions as the baseline, which is really great because then the baseline is building specific and not tied to an ASHRAE baseline that might not be super applicable. So then here we have two sets, two tiers, depending on whether the project is paying prevailing wage, meeting prevailing wage requirements and apprenticeship requirements or not. And then there's a maximum of 50% site EUI reduction. So the minimum 25%, then there's this sliding scale between 26 and 49% with an additional cents per square foot adder, and then it reaches the 50% maximum with $1 per square foot without prevailing wage and $5 per square foot with prevailing wage. So that is it for the tax credits, the building tax credits on the IRA. Now we're going to move into the rebate programs. So the first one we have here is the homeowner managing energy savings rebate. We've got sort of there's modeled energy savings in these top two rows here, and then measured energy savings here. So this is likely only applicable to folks doing gut rehabs. Don't really believe that ground up new construction is going to be applicable for the homes rebates. Also, it would likely, if you're going passive house, it would likely be pretty easy to get this modeled energy savings of 35% or higher, in which case, depending on whether it's market rate or affordable housing, you're looking at $4,000 per dwelling unit and $8,000 per dwelling unit. And then in the bottom here, we have measured energy savings, which might be a little bit more intensive in terms of the work required, because you'd have to do the measurement and the M&V afterwards to prove the savings, but still really good incentive rates here for energy savings. And then the next rebate we have is the high efficiency electric homes rebate. This is only open to certain qualifying affordable multifamily and single family homes. It is open to both existing buildings and new construction with an incentive cap at $14,000 per dwelling unit. And this has dollar per widget incentives, you know, $1,750 for heat pump water heaters, $8,000 for heat pump space heating, which is a great. Some money here for electric stoves, cooktop ranges, other appliances, a really good amount of money, $4,000 for electric load service upgrades, and then $2,500 for wiring, which, you know, if you're looking to electrify, these are, you know, and it's an older building, oops, sorry about that. This might be, you know, upgrading your electrical infrastructure might really be a big part of the project. So these dollar amounts are really great in this rebate program. And then at the bottom here, $1,600 for weatherization type work. So the thing about homes and HERA, there's some things we know at the moment and some things that we don't quite know yet. What we know is that they can't be combined with each other, but they will be able to layer in with the other tax credits that we talked about. So 25D, 179D, 45L. The funding is going to be allocated to each state using the state energy program formula. So in New York, that's NYSERDA. In California, that's the California Energy Commission. And they have released the amounts that each state is going to be allocated. So in New York, it's $318 million, and then that's split between the two programs. In California, it's $582 million, again, split between the two programs. But what we don't know is the timing of when these rebates are going to be launched. And the reason for that is that the state energy offices, NYSERDA, the California Energy Commission, have to come up with their plans for these rebate programs, submit them to the DOE. The DOE has to review those plans and then accept them or, you know, reject them with changes to be made. So that process is going to take some time. And the other thing is, because the states have the ability to sort of design the programs in the way that they want, there might be some flexibility there, and we don't know if these numbers that I just presented are going to be final. So what I just presented and what was in the IRA were the maximums that the federal government would allow for these rebate programs. States might decide, based on existing programs they already have, utility programs that might exist, to maybe change some of those numbers a little bit, change the structure of the programs. So we're not clear how that's going to work out. And sort of to my last point there, we're really not sure how these rebate programs are going to interact with existing utility and NYSERDA or other state incentive programs. So we got some really good info. We're really looking forward to these rebate programs, but there's still a lot to come out about the details of them and how they're exactly going to work. We're staying on top of it and participating in some RFIs that are coming out from DOE, and there'll certainly be more information coming out on these two rebate programs as the year progresses. I'm now going to hand it back to Amanda to go through a couple of other programs that are in the IRA.
All right, thank you, Ian. So we've gotten through tax credits, deductions, rebates, and so the last category of subsidies that we'll talk through is likely going to be financing. You'll see what I mean in a second, where it could potentially be grants or other types of funding as well. But we'll talk through this HUD program, and then there's another EPA program that we'll talk through as well. So this GRRP, the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program from HUD, this could be very interesting for those of you who have multifamily with any units that participate in HUD programs. We don't know very much about it. There was a very small chunk in the legislation, but this has the potential to be the most flexible. So if you have passive house or any other high performance building projects that you're planning, this could be useful for you. And so there's $1 billion that HUD is going to have for this program. They will be able to offer it in the method that best suits your project. So if you need a forgivable loan, they're setting up to be able to offer you that. If you need it as a grant, they're also setting it up so you could potentially access that too. And the eligible uses are very wide ranging. They include, but are not limited to everything you see here on this slide. So electrification, energy efficiency, air quality improvements, resiliency. That's going to be interesting to see how that one gets defined. Benchmarking. And so we know that HUD has started talking about this. Bright Power and many others have participated in some of the initial RFIs that HUD has put out about this program, but we don't quite know when HUD is going to be ready to launch it. One of the things that they're thinking about is whether or not they launch it all in one piece or whether they should do it in a more piecemeal fashion. So they might start with funding specifically for maybe half of this list and split it up that way. They also might decide to split it up between project types, so like ground up new construction versus rehabs or something like that. So they're considering how they could phase this money and how to structure it in a way that makes sense. But this is definitely something to pay attention to if you have any multifamily with HUD units. Next slide. Okay, we've made it to the very last one. So the last program that we're going to talk about is the EPA's new Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reduction Fund. This is also similar to the HUD one that I just talked about. It's a little bit wide open in terms of what is actually going to come out of this. There's a couple of different things that we might see here. The first of which is a national green bank. We actually don't have one. There are several states and local jurisdictions that have green banks, but we do not have a federal level green bank. So the IRA gives the EPA the ability to create one if they want. We haven't really seen an indication yet of if that's what they will decide to do. But even if they don't create a federal level green bank, there will still be a lot of money here for local green banks and also community-based lenders. So between those, there should be some really innovative financing options coming out of this program. So stay tuned. We've heard some inklings about what might be coming here, but you know, if you're like us and you've been in the space for a while, you know that getting financing for anything is hard and the terms are really challenging. And they might say, well, you have to have a $5 million project to access financing from some of the existing options that we use now. So, you know, I'm expecting the terms to be more flexible, the amounts to be higher, and lots of other really great things like that. All right. Next slide. Perfect. Okay, so we've made it through all of the programs, or at least the ones that we think are most relevant to you. There are probably 50 more that we did cover today. And so the most important question that I know that you're probably asking yourselves after we've talked about all of these different things is, you know, we have projects underway. How do you tackle this, right? How do you incorporate this into your planning? And so here's a brief summary of how we think you should approach that. So you'll see here in the left side column, most of what we talked about today is available now. It started Jan 1, 2023. The challenge right now is that while these credits and deductions that we talked about here on the left side column are technically available now, we don't have the updated rules. So we have the guidance from the legislation itself, but the federal agencies are going through the process of figuring out some of the key questions surrounding each of these programs, like when do you have to file and how do you file and which agencies are involved, right? Because some of these, like the new low income bonuses with the ITC, is going to require special paperwork and what's going to be in that application. And, you know, in the case of those low income bonuses, there's going to be a cap on the number of applications that they accept. So there's all of those types of details that the federal agencies are trying to figure out now. We'll see if it comes out on schedule. They're working hard. They're working very hard. So keep an eye out for more of that detail as we go through the next couple of months. We should have hopefully all of it over the next few months. For the right side column, for the rebate programs and then the HUD and EPA programs, the timeline is a little bit grayer. So like Ian mentioned, for the rebate programs, these are going to be run by the states and they have to get DOE approval. So that means in states where they've already started working on it, we might see rebates launch the end of this year. I think we're more likely to see something next year, 2024, for those rebate programs, and those will be run by the state energy offices. For the HUD and the EPA programs, they have deadlines that were set in the legislation. I'm not sure if they're going to meet them. They have started working on putting these out, but we haven't gotten the indication yet on when HUD and EPA are going to put out the final solicitation notice for both of these programs. Like I said, they have been putting out the RFI, so they are working on it now, but the exact timeline and how they're going to phase the different pieces of those programs is still up in the air. So something to keep an eye on. So like I said, it's a lot. We are keeping close track of what's happening and hopefully can help you all and all of our clients start making firmer plans on what you want to incorporate into your projects later this year. All right. I think we got through everything. Yeah, there we go. Record time. But I think we have a lot of questions. That's great.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Amanda and Ian. Really, it's I knew there was a lot of information coming, but I'm always surprised. Really excellent. Look forward to digging into it here. So if we back up a little bit, I guess, from starting at the beginning and work our way through, and please keep adding questions and let's pull them out as we can. There were questions just to sort of go through this. You know, I think there's the basic question of organization about what is for affordable or market rate, what is for you know, multifamily versus single family, and how are these things applied to the, I guess one of the basic questions that came out was, you know, is it to the individual homeowner? Is it to the property owner? Is it to the developer? And how, you know, how is this money flowing through there? So if we break it down, the 25C tax credit on residential energy efficiency tax credit, you know, are these numbers by unit or by project? And I think, did you, if I'm remembering correctly, going to an annual cap versus a lifetime cap? And what does that mean exactly? How would that play out?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. And so in this case, the important piece to keep in mind is that for multifamily and commercial, the only properties within that category that are eligible for this particular program are condos and co-ops, right? So this would not be a situation where you, if you have a multifamily rental, for example, where you would be accessing this. And so the way we think this will work is that single family homeowners and condo and co-op residents can file for this themselves. It would not be a credit that the developer or the project team would be filing for. But again, we have to see the rules.
And then if you couldn't use all the credit, you would roll over to the next year. Is that how that goes forward, or do you get
No,
to spend more?
No, it doesn't roll over. It doesn't roll over to the next year. But this $3,200, you can apply for it each year. And so it used to be like a $1,200 maximum that you could apply for at that property forever, and that shifted to an annual limit. I
see. So your continual improvements.
Yeah.
Got it. So that goes to the next question that we had there, was whether it applied to new construction as well, or is this purely a retrofit?
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not.
right? Because they're using these per widget. And generally when it's per widget, the answer is no, but we'll see.
Right. Fair enough. And we did have a question, which I think we've just answered. The 25C applies to owner occupied multifamily. I mean, if it's a condo or a co-op, then the owners will receive those.
Mhm.
On the 45L, on energy efficient homes, can you combine the Energy Star and Zero Energy Ready
Do both
credits?
certifications?
Yeah,
Hmm.
and get the money?
Potentially,
That's
yeah, they haven't answered that.
That's coming in the rulemaking.
Yeah.
And is this a 45L? Is this a tax credit that this is for the homeowner or the developer?
So for the multifamily properties, this would be a developer credit. For single family, that is a question that we cannot answer.
Okay, it could be for the builder.
Right.
Yeah, it's a big question. Like with these, I guess, is the developer getting it, the builder getting it, the homeowner getting it,
Yeah.
the professional? Was there one where the incentives may be able to flow through to the professionals?
Yeah, 179D, which is available for commercial and multifamily rentals. Non-profit building owners can transfer the credit to primary design professionals, but it is specific to that. So it's not any building owner, it is specifically non-profit building owners.
Okay, very good. And the potentially combining of the 45L and the 179D, I mean, they're different.
They are different. 45L is a tax credit, and then 179D is a tax deduction. So a tax credit is a return on, your taxes, whereas a deduction is an actual reduction on on the amount of income that you are taxed on.
Right.
So they can be combined because they're not the same.
So you could double. Great.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm sure there are more questions coming in. We'll circle back around. I'm doing the initial lap here. Going to the rebates on the homes rebate, are there restrictions to the type of projects the homes program is applicable to?
So this would be multifamily, probably not ground up new construction. This is most likely only going to be existing buildings and possibly some gut rehabs. So this is not for commercial buildings. Single family may also qualify here. That is not something that Ian or I will probably know off the top of our heads. But those are the projects that are going to qualify here. And so you should note that it's going to take a pretty significant retrofit to qualify for this, because hitting a 20% energy reduction is, I think, more ambitious than what a lot of existing buildings will go after generally. So this is still going to be a pretty significant project. But if you can hit it, these dollar amounts are all significantly higher than any of the existing incentive programs that I've seen in New York, California, or any of the other states that have multifamily programs already. So it's still worth paying attention to.
That's fantastic. And since we only do passive house retrofits, we'll get it. Hopefully, right? I guess my question is regarding that, on the measured building savings. I mean, that's really intriguing going forward. I don't know if there's been an incentive like that before, but measuring, like, how granular are we talking about measuring? And is this just going on for the foreseeable future until the money runs out?
Yeah, so we don't know the answer to that question yet. So like Ian said, that each state is going to run their own homes and their own HERA, the electrification rebate program. They're going to run their own rebate programs. And so some states, we don't know exactly yet how much variability the DOE will allow for. There's a chance that New York's version of the homes program could look very different from New Jersey's version of the program. And some of them might use the measured savings options and some of them might not, depending on how much flexibility DOE gives. So there are some incentive programs to date that have done this measured savings approach. Generally, they are verifying that using your utility bills or using sensors on your meters, things like that. So we'll see how the states decide to pursue this, because you're right, it could be very interesting. But I think it is a worthy pursuit. You know, we're always in this challenging space with incentive programs everywhere where we need to verify the savings that we are projecting. And so I think generally it's a good thing, but there are going to be challenges to rolling this out in a way that is fair and that is, you know, accurate, things like that.
Yeah, no, it seems really exciting. So on the high efficiency, or actually, where am I here? Do duplexes to 5-unit projects qualify for the homes rebates?
For the homes rebates?
Yeah, what we're just, yeah.
I think we'll have to check on that and get back. I'm not entirely sure what the minimum requirement is for an eligible project for the homes rebate.
Okay. And then there was another question regarding homes on the language. In case of a single family home, the building and the dwelling unit is the same unless an ADU counts as a separate dwelling unit. How do we?
What's an ADU?
It's an accessory dwelling unit. It's
Mhm.
where folks are building, the zoning's being upzoned and you're allowed to build a dwelling unit in the backyard typically.
Yeah, I would say typically, you know, where it says dwelling unit and it's applicable to single family home, it means like just one single family home as a singular entity. I'm not sure about that ADU question though.
Right.
Yeah, that'll be something that the states will have to dig into, because
Exactly.
the existing incentive programs that the states run have varying definitions of what it means to be a unit, whether that's a code defined dwelling unit or, you know, some of the other definitions that we come across.
Let's see, moving to the high efficiency electric home rebates. What do we have here? Are they apply for affordable home? I guess the question is, with affordable multifamily and single family, it's going to the building or the unit owner.
Yes, it's going to the building owner, right?
Okay. So, and then I believe there was a statement along the way of, can you, on certain qualifying affordable developments. Do you have any further?
Yeah, so this HERA, or sometimes known as HERA program, has an AMI requirement. We'll see exactly what AMI level they go with, but if you meet the AMI requirement, then that could be affordable multifamily or single family. If you meet that AMI requirement, then you can access this program. We think what they're actually going to do here is create varying levels. So if you are in the lowest income bracket here, you can access the full incentives that Ian has here on the slide. Whereas if you're maybe in a more moderate income range, you can access 50% of what you see here on the slide. So that's what we mean by qualifying affordable property. So it's not, we talked about a lot of different ways that constitute low income status. We talked about some of the mapping, and we talked about, right. So I think that's, I can see where the confusion is. So this is not a map, most likely. This is going to be a pure AMI requirement.
Got it.
Just to quickly add to what Amanda just said, it was one of the interesting things in the IRA is that the low and moderate income and affordable housing requirements are not uniform across the tax credits and the rebates. They're sort of somewhat different for each thing. So that's the devil's in the details, and that's really where the details are in terms of what's able to qualify and what's not.
I have a feeling they may need to talk to you. The so where are we here with this? The homes and HERS, is it true that they can't be combined with each other, even if they can individually be combined with tax credits?
Yes, that is true. So the homes, you can't double dip the incentives essentially for the same project. So you have to go with the homes or the HERA rebates. You can't go with one or the other, but they can be stacked with the tax credits and deductions.
Got it. Good to know. And then in terms of do you have an idea of, I guess, some of this is cost benefit in terms of the amount of legwork that's going to be required to get the incentives. And it's always one of those chicken and egg things, so to speak, or, when you're standing at the stack of NYSERDA regulations, you wonder if it's going to be worth it at the end of the day. How, I guess there was a question specifically about the 45, or no, the 179D of calculating versus the benefit, and what's your gut saying?
Yeah, so like we were pointing out with some of the other programs, this one also, if you have an existing building or a renovation, it's going to be pretty deep. So if you're going for a passive house certification, you should be able to hit a 25% site UI reduction. If you're not, this is going to be challenging because, like I said, getting
Right.
to 25% for
No, we should be able to hit 50.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that will be one of the interesting things to see with all of these is how much paperwork it actually turns out to be. Because with some of the old versions of these tax credits that we talked about today, we've heard from many folks that the IRS doesn't really check in a very detailed fashion. So if it turns out to be the same for many of these, then it's worth it.
Right.
If you have to, put together an arm and a leg and a kidney to get all the right paperwork together, then you're right. I think it's going to be a harder decision about what is worth your time, but I think we need to get to the initial stage of just getting the specific list of what exactly the IRS is going to require here compared to the old version, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, definitely agree on that. And just to, the nice new aspect of 179D is they have this building specific baseline for existing building retrofits. But taking your existing building baseline versus just comparing it to an ASHRAE is definitely going to be more challenging, but there's the benefit of it that it'll be more specific to your building. So again, there's going to be a cost benefit question there of whether it's worth that extra. And we'll have to see how it shakes out. Yeah.
But it sounds like it could be and should be. I guess to reiterate a point and to just point to it again. So, a lot of folks here are doing passive house buildings or intending to do passive house buildings and getting certified, that the certification itself is not incentivized in any way in this. It's more a matter of the metrics of the house being able to deliver on a whole bunch of incentives. And that may include doing Energy Star, net zero, energy ready buildings along the way.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. These Energy Star and the Zero Energy Ready homes are the only sort of certifications that are mentioned in the IRA that are going to get. But just as you said, all of these things, should be attainable to a certain degree when getting passive house certification. So you got to just kind of make sure you're checking all the boxes as you're going through.
Right. And what about, is there an issue around any third-party certification of the figures that you are supplying? Like an accountant who prepares your tax return, the accountant has a professional responsibility. Who's taking that responsibility and supplying the energy numbers?
That is a good question that we'll have to follow up on, and also on how that's going to change with some of the recent modifications that Eon just talked to.
Right.
Um,
And could passive house certification serve as a proxy for that?
Interesting. The wheels are turning.
Got to get it in there somehow. If you're working on a project now, you know, it's bigger projects too. They're going to take a year, 2 years, 3 years to build out. In terms of what those, what was available, what we're planning on, I think maybe if you could, yeah, the slide dip into a little bit more, like say I'm doing a public library building or affordable housing or, you know, condominiums. How should we think about that? If we could just.
Yeah, so the nice part about the tax credits and deductions on the left side is that, yes, they are technically available now. We're waiting on the rules, like I said. Most of these you're probably not going to have to file until the project is placed into service. For the programs on the right, for the new rebate programs, and also for the financing options from HUD and EPA, those are more likely to be programs where you have to apply before the project starts construction, I should say. So that's the tricky part, is keeping an eye on those rebate programs, the HUD and EPA programs, because the rebate programs, especially once they launch, are probably going to say something like, you can't access these retroactively, that you have to apply in advance before you start construction. So the tax credits and deductions, you'll probably be able to still access for projects that have already started now. For the programs on the right, that's where it's a little bit grayer as to whether you will be able to access those for projects that have already started.
All right, good to know. So we should, where should we be looking to see as these things are announced? We'll have you back at some
Yeah,
point.
we can come back, bring us back. There are several federal agencies that are sending out updates here. That's the DOE, the Treasury Department, the IRS. There's probably somewhere that I'm missing, HUD and EPA, for the programs that they are specifically running. So they have been sending out requests for information from the industry on how they should structure all of this. So you can sign up for those emails on their website. There are various organizations that have been doing great work tracking all of this, RMI, Sierra Club, several others in that vein, who are also putting together good resources on all of these things so that you don't have to track DOE emails. But yeah, it is very piecemeal. So yeah, that's the downside, is that we're getting a little bit over here and a little bit over there, and it's going to be a little while longer until we have something more coherent, but we're getting there. They're making progress.
Good. And we'll certainly try to be one of those vessels to disseminate the information going forward to our community. We're at the top of the hour, just beyond. So I know there are many questions still out there, and I have no doubt that we could be going for quite some time. So we're going to copy the chat here. I'll forward it to Amanda and Eon. If there are particular ones we haven't hit, or I'll try to edit it down and see if we can get some further answers if there are critical ones out there. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time and thank Amanda and Eon for coming and speaking today. Is really super interesting and definitely the best explanation I've heard yet of the IRA by far. And thank everyone for joining, and look forward to taking advantage of this money that's out there to decarbonize our buildings. This is the moment we've been waiting for in many ways, and I hope we're all as aggressive as we can be about utilizing that money and doing high efficiency passive house buildings.
Thank you so much, Ken.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.